Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and I really enjoyed the presentations. It's too bad that Timothy has to go. I appreciate a lot of what I've heard. Deepak, I really agree with you. Fresh water and water is very important, so it's much more than land alone. Okay, so let's see. I'm an agronomist, so I'm not gonna show models I developed or economic models or things that I've done. What I've been looking at is if it would be possible to see what indirect complications, indirect effects of biofuel production increase in the US could be captured, especially when it comes to land use change. So this is a slide presenting, let's say, not the mess, but let's say the situation where we're in. There's a real lack of consensus. The data and the tools are maybe, well, they're not complete and they're not covering the situation to the extent that we want. So there's all kind of issues with ILUC assessment, especially ILUC modeling. So that is one question: what model would you use? And one of the answers was, I think, given by Deepak, depends on the answer that you want. So I don't want to be cynical. So I'm just going to a situation where we're going to look at let's say, a real world data and projections to that, and then compare the outcomes. So if we look at the framework that we're going to use today, you can see if we have a biofuel policy leading to increased biofuel production, in this case, ethanol in the US, you need more crops. So we all agree on that. And we have heard a lot about crop prices. If you have a higher demand, then the price will go up. No economist will disagree with that. As a consequence of the higher prices, in many cases, it's projected that there are changes in the global markets. And in this way, in this case, I'm going to present it very simplified, that assuming the US would have higher internal crop prices, especially corn prices, then their exports would go down. So that would have a trade impact, and other countries would step into that, as Timothy said, because what you do is you take a decision, hey, we can make more money because there's a higher demand. In this case, that would be leading to deforestation in Brazil. What is not really in many of the analysis is this part, and this is in blue, and this is the internal dynamics that we find in the US. Animal feed market is one, because corn is mostly used for feed, but also internal changes that you could have in land use. I'm going to discuss a little bit more on that. So what are we doing? I'm going to compare basically two narratives. One saying, okay, increased demand is going to lead to a shock, price shocks, as I said. Capital land markets will be involved, will be affected, higher prices that have been mentioned before, and that will in the end result into changes in, let's say, the global crop production and especially the land markets. So there's a difference, there's a clear distinction between products like corn in the case of the harvested area and the crop area, including the forest or let's say the land cover. I'm coming back to that. Yeah. So this is the most let's say the dominant narratives, and we have named it the trade and market response narrative. So there's an impact in trade and markets. There's also a narrative that is more focusing on the, let's say, the technical part and the internal dynamics of, in this case, the US food and feed production and use system. So that is defining that we have more changes than only just the biofuel. So it's broader, and there is also including preferences, population. And then you can see the response is also more dynamic. And it assumes, I think, a higher dynamic character and a higher capacity to adjust. And we're going to see more of that, and then you can conclude for yourself. So elements of this narrative are that there is an opportunity in the crop production system, in this case in the US, for example, to increase cropping intensity. I'm going to explain to you what it is. But also we're going to have options to invest more in the infrastructure, which also can have an impact, and crop rotations can change. So these are two narratives that are basically opposing each other. They cannot be, let's say, followed in the same time. But I think the extremes but are interesting enough and helpful for us to understand what the models and the papers are projecting and what we can see in reality. So I'm going to compare a few model studies, including searching. I'm sorry, Tim is gone because I would like to have his response, and no doubt he will find me afterwards. Also, work from the Food and Agriculture Policy Research Institute in Iowa, FAPRI, and consequential LCA models like Miguel has been working on for a lot of his time, and as he is presenting so well. So we're going to look at basically mostly of the papers. They follow this trade and market response narrative, which, as I said, is like dominant over the other internal adjustment narrative. I'm going to focus on price effect and trade because these are basically the instruments that we need if we want to have a transfer from changes and responses in the US to the global market. And I'm going to focus on Brazil, but that's just a simplification, as I said. In the end, I'm going to present some time series and observation data. So important for us and important for me to explain to you is what would be the route, how the domestic change in the US following the policy and the increase in ethanol production, how could that be translated to any land use change in Brazil? We know, yes, price, but we need a more clear instrument for that, and that will be the trade. So if we compare both approaches, again, trade and market response, they have a really, they make an adjustment estimation. These are usually done in advance or ex ante model studies. What would be the impact if we would change a policy like this? Then you can see that the ethanol and corn demand would, ethanol production corn demand would increase. That would lead to a shock price changes would have, and then would have changes and corrections in markets and exports. I've mentioned it before. The internal adjustment narrative studies, they tend to have a lower projection of the expansion, so they're a bit more conservative, and they focus on the flexibility and crop and livestock production and use, not only production, but also the use. How are we going to use it, and what will be the impact of that? So if you look at these studies, they predict some land use changes, but not so much as in the other narrative, and also changes in land efficiency. So there's mitigation internally. What is important here is that as we look at the carbon impact of biofuels, the question is, how does these changes, how does this story affect the carbon effects? I think we could talk a little bit more on that. So I'm going to show you a few studies. So this is from the FAPRI model. As I said, I'm not going to lay out all the details of this work. It has been published by IEA Bioenergy as a co-production of multiple task groups. I just want you to focus on the blue part, which is the trade. So you can see here, this is a projection that was done, I think, I'm not sure, I think it was 2009, and they said most of the changes, most of the demand, let's say the generation of corn that is needed to produce the ethanol, but will come from an area increase and some yield effect. These together, they make up 55%. And trade is interesting. There's hardly any change in trade. Here they say 0.7 million ton a change in the corn trade as a result of the increased biofuel production. So this is the Searchinger paper. This is a totally different picture. You can see here on the left that the trade is much more important. You can see on the right in the table, there's a decline that is projected for corn export, for wheat export, soybean, you name it, also livestock production. And this is all because in the domestic change in the US system, corn will become more expensive. They lose their position on the world market, and also livestock production based on the corn will also be more expensive. So that is basically the core of this projection as it was published in 2008. Miguel has also presented this work very well. You see, it's not so high, but still a trade is affected. This is another study, and interestingly enough, they do follow the trade market response, but they expect less trade effects. It's all yield. So this is also an option. You don't see this too much, but it's interesting to see that there's a diversity of that. Of course, this will have implications. And this is what we have seen, what we see if we look at the statistics. So as a result of the introduction of the biofuel policies in 2005, this is a 10-period window that we are evaluating, we see an increase of corn use by 92 million tons, which is basically similar to most studies. Searchinger was projecting a little bit more, Flug a little bit low. So there's a variation, but there's not so much difference, although there still is a difference, but the most important difference is when it comes to the exports. And what we see, so what we have seen, and I will show you the data, is that although the corn price went up, especially on the short term, as it was projected in one or two of the earlier presentations. Thank you for that. It was really good to look at that. You could see some changes in the internal use of feeds. Also, you could see that the DDGS production output was also used to compensate for that. And as a result, the net export decline was very, very small. So although we can see that the corn production in Brazil has gone up in these same periods, there's no trade impact here. So we cannot say that the Brazilians have stepped in where the US stepped out. Okay, this is some trend lines just to show you what we see. The corn area indeed is increasing. It is quite a lot, but it's very difficult. I'm sorry, I flagged out the years. There is a bit of increase early after 2005, but on the whole, we cannot say that it is a permanent, because it basically adapted to the long-term trends. So this is for corn, but when we look at the lower figure, you see that the cereal area in the US is declining. So it's going up, but it's certainly not increasing, and especially not increasing to the same extent that the corn area is expanding. So this means that corn is increasing in cultivated area, but it is going at partly at the extent of other crops, other cereals, that is. Here we see an overview of the prices, the price fluctuations, and the exports. You see that after 2005, there has been a price increase. Then it went down, but the real spike was in 2012, where there was a drought situation. And you can see the price there are really going up and down, because after the spike in 2012, as I said, because of the drought, you could see that it came back to a level in 2016 to 2017, which is more or less in line with the long-term trend. So I did not compare this to other type of price changes, and I would be really interested to see to compare this to the price index, but unfortunately I had no time to do it. More important and more interesting is what we see in the changes in the import and export. So the export is the highest, of course. Import changes so much, but basically the only substantial import was in 2012 and 2013. When we look at the export, you can see that following 2005, the export did not decline. It did increase, and at the first point, and only in 2010, it was at the same level basically that it was before the introduction of the biofuel policies. So although there was a price effect, and you can see there was a price hike, it was some correction, and then but maybe it was beyond what was, let's say, the trend line. You could see that this price effect was not translated into a decline of the exports. And this gives us a bit of a dilemma. Yeah. So although we know that the price has been changed, we cannot say that this price effect has been transferred to other markets, because there was no dip in the trade volumes. And we can look at other products as well, and I've done that, but I've just focused on corn. I think the elephant in the room is, one, what happens here in this land. in this area. So is this flexibility, is there one of a time occasion? We looked at 10 years and we looked at the US only. Do we also have this flexibility in the EU? Do we also have it in other countries? I think we do, but I did not check that. And also, I think what is more important is, do we really understand in our project, let's say economic studies and the trade studies, do we really understand what is going on? This is one of the figures I think that has been really helpful for me. What you see here on the right, you see barley. And you can see that the barley average harvest in the US in around 2010 is 3.9 ton per hectare. What we see is over the period that we are looking at, that barley and other soft cereals are being replaced partly by corn. And if you look at the corn yield, which in the US is an average of close to 10 ton, that is a very interesting situation, because then if you take out the ethanol, which would then be around 5.7 ton per hectare, equivalent of let's say of the weight, you would still have DDGS that is a potential, a very strong animal feed, which is higher than the barley yield. So this is one example, but it is very relevant, as I said, because the cereal area is declining, which means that maize is increasing. It would be interesting to look at the water effects of that. I don't know that, but as I said, I agreed with Deepak. That is, I think, something that is quite revealing and neglected. This is some old data that I took. This is between 2000 and 2010. I think what is important here, when we look at the changes in agriculture area over this period, you see that over a time period of 10 years, there is a loss of almost 50 million hectare of agriculture area. This is agriculture cover. So I understand that agriculture has been monitored to expand, but is also losing area. And this land is going to other sectors. So when it comes to a carbon price or a carbon impact, my question is, would not this carbon, the loss that is caused by this land loss, has to be borne by other sectors rather than agriculture? Because agriculture is losing to tourism, it is losing to transport, it's losing to urban areas. So basically, if we are claiming that agriculture should be in some way attributed to the carbon loss, I think we should look beyond that, because this also would be a consequential LCA issue in my personal opinion. The second row after that is the second row to the right is also very revealing. You see that over this period, although almost 50 million hectares were lost, this is area, the increase of cropping intensity has generated more than double the area. So on a, let's say, on a balanced base, you see that the area that is available for food crops over this period has increased. It has not reduced, even although almost 50 million hectares of agriculture area was lost. So agriculture has been shrinking, but the harvested area has been increasing. And you can see on the left that is quite revealing. I don't have the recent data, but I think it is still there. Okay, so I'll try to bring a few messages for the discussion. The model projection that's still leading to conflicting results. So I think that is very clear. We got two narratives. They have contradictory findings. We have done analysis for the US. I would be very happy to see this for China, for example, and or for other countries, other regions. So please contact me if you want to do this type of analysis. Yeah. If we look at, I'm going to skip this. So you can look at other studies done by the IEA. These are some other considerations. We have a lot of uncertainty into the ILUC factors. And there's a tendency to use generic ILUC factors that has also been presented over here. This is a warning. We want to warn against that, because there's really a strong variation. We have just shown that over this 10-year period in the US, the indirect effect, let's say the propagation of the internal effects to other markets could not be found. It doesn't mean they are not there. Maybe they are there, but there's still we have found no evidence of this mechanism, like a change in trade volume has been occurring. So again, hypotheses and policies of effects of policy, they must be, I think, tested more strictly. We use the trade models too easily, maybe, and there's certainly not enough, let's say, warnings about how to use and what the interpretation should be done on the outcomes of that. I don't say that models are not good, but it was mentioned before, our models are not good. Some are useful, but I think they're only useful if you use them in the context and if you explain to the people who are looking at the outcomes how you got at it and what are the limitations of that. There's also a call for to engage stakeholders in more, let's say, place-based approaches. But I think this is basically the gist of what we wanted to produce, what I wanted to present to you. There's a need for variable data. That's very clear. I'm very fond of using long-term data trends and to try to look for changes in that and to test if really things are different because of this policy. I think we are still away from being where we can to predict the changes. So if we cannot look forward with sufficient certainty, let's look back and see what happens. Yeah, and then we can use this to measure policy effects. It is very interesting also to do causal analysis. I had no time to work on that, but our colleague Debo has done excellent work of this in the US. One important thing is that land management and land cover are totally different. Not every area, ton or every hectare that is harvested means an expansion of land cover. That is really something that is too simple. And as an agronomist, I really have a problem with that. So let's see if we can get more consistent and more transparent approaches to see we get more standard terms, definitions, baselines, and scenarios to quantify the effects. I think that's it, basically. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hans. Very nice to hear your presentation. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left in which some of these topics can be explored a little further and discussed. Would anyone like to ask a question or make a comment? Start us off.